Welcome to Maritime Matters, a podcast focused on leaders in the maritime market, the people, the companies, the technologies that are making and breaking the news, helping to lead the maritime industry to a safer, more efficient, more profitable, and cleaner future. Welcome aboard. This is Greg Troutwine with Maritime Matters, the Marine Link podcast, and we're very pleased to be joined again by Jim Bunze of the Propane Education Research Council, or PERC, to discuss energy transition in the port sector. So, Jim, I was searching back. I've been traveling like a maniac, as you, I know, always do, and I was looking back to see how many times we've actually been on Maritime Matters together. I didn't get an exact count, but I feel like I owe you a t-shirt or a mug or something for being one of my most prolific guests. So with that, welcome back to the podcast.
Greg, I think it's number 7, so I'm pretty excited, and that we got people still following where we're at, and it's a fun story to tell because I'm really helping people. We're cleaning up the environment, we're saving some people some money, and it's a fun story to tell, and people are always amazed. They don't Propane can do that, and I'm like, yeah, Propane can do that. So it's appreciate you always having me back on here.
Well, we'll call this lucky number 7, and we'll see how it goes. So, let's per usual, we'll dig in because I know it's a topic that you love to talk about. So, as you know better than I, ports are under increasing pressure to reduce emissions, but also obviously control their operating costs. Where does propane fit into that transition?
So Greg, like you said, this is what I love to talk about on a daily basis. And we go to port operators. I was on the West Coast. I was down in Florida. I'm in Texas. I'm in Louisiana, New Orleans. We go visit everybody, and they're really looking to decarbonize, right? And the easiest place to decarbonize right now is, we know diesel is an awesome energy source, but the reason with it is because of all the carbon molecules that are in there. So propane just kind of fits right in that right space where we have C3H8. So there's only 3 carbons, so we don't have a big chain, but it still is a hydrocarbon. But if you look, people look at going to hydrogen, and propane is 75% hydrogen, and that's why it's so clean coming out of the tailpipe. So really where we fit in is, ports are taking, they have to meet their green ports initiatives. They're trying to cut their total carbon emissions down, 40% by 2030. Now, 10 years ago, when we were talking about this, 2030 wasn't that far away, but we're 4 years away now. It's here, and it's happening, and fleets are starting to realize what's happening. So when we start changing forklifts, big forklifts over to propane, terminal tractors, any of the ground handling equipment that's around there, even the cutaway buses, all that equipment they can buy in propane right now. And so when the ports are looking at this, trying to keep their leases, trying to meet their initiatives, we have propane equipment to do it. Now, what happens is we save them money also, because you got diesel, and like I told you, it's a lot of energy, but you kind of look at propane, you kind of look at the pricing of both of them. We talked last time about the Willie Wan story. Now, he's out in California where they pay a lot of money for diesel, but he saves $1 million a year. And I keep swinging that, but he really does. Now, when we start coming to the East Coast and, Mid-Atlantic and even through the Gulf, it's not as big of savings, but there still is a savings to switch to propane. So now they can meet their decarbonization needs. A lot of the PIDP funding that's coming out, they're available for propane equipment. So as the ports are pulling this, so now we have affordable equipment, reduce emissions, save a couple dollars. I mean, it's kind of the home run. It scares a lot of the operators because they're like, all right, so what's bad about it? And I'm like, hey, there isn't a lot of bad of what's going on. Let me get you some equipment. Let me let you drive it. And, after they use the equipment, it's amazing the orders are getting placed for the OEMs that I'm helping out place propane equipment.
Anyone watching this, obviously, or anyone who watches the news knows that fuel pricing has been extremely volatile recently. And quite frankly, it doesn't look like it's going to be letting up anytime soon. So, we talk about traditionally when we're talking about fuel pricing, we're talking about oil and gas. But how does propane compare to diesel and gasoline in terms of price stability?
Well, you kind of look at propane, and it is a byproduct of oil refinery. And that's where it used to really mainly come from. But you look at a lot of this extra, and why do we have an extra 25 billion gallons here in the United States? It's from the natural gas liquid processing. So the NGL processing, propane is a byproduct of that. We're very similar to natural gas, and natural gas used to be my competitor, but now I say gaseous power generation, gaseous engines all run the same. So it's the processes of natural gas liquids. And what that really means to our economy, unfortunately this war is going on. We're seeing diesel prices, going up by 2.5x. Same thing with gasoline. Well, you kind of watch the propane, and even the propane, the last 15 years, we're pretty flat. There'll be a little volatility up and down, but we're talking maybe 5% up and down. So when this spike happened, propane is really sitting in a really good place for our fleets. Now, a couple of the fleets that switched over to propane, and I'll pick on my friends up in New Jersey without even saying who they are, but they have a fuel contract. And the cool thing is, when you work with your propane provider, you can say, okay, we're going to use this many gallons, so we're going to use 1 million gallons a year. You can pre-buy that for up to 5 years. Not saying you have to pay for it, but you commit in a fueling contract. It locks in that fuel price for 5 years. So no matter what's happening, because this war could be a day, it could be the next 5 years. We don't know, so there's volatility in there. But using propane locks in your price. And then as I've met with fleets, we were sitting down in Port Everglades, and we talked about cleanliness, we talked about decarbonization, we talked about getting the SOx and the NOx and the particulate matter emissions out of there, and nobody really cared. And they started looking at the pricing, and they're like, "Oh, our diesel is so cheap down here in Florida." And I go, "Well, how about we lock in that price for the next 5 years?" And my friends from AmeriGas sat across the table. They're like, "Oh, we'd love to have a 5-year fueling agreement with you, and you lock it." And everybody's eyebrows went up. They're like, "Man, as an operator, I know my fuel price, and it's not going to fluctuate in this market," and it's huge to get rid of those swings.
But throughout our maritime business, we talk about fuel transition relentlessly. And as you know, it's not as simple as saying, "Hey, I'm going to run on ammonia or hydrogen," and then tomorrow it's available. It's just not that simple. Alternative fuels need infrastructure, which is often the biggest challenge in adopting new fuels. So when you look at propane, what does the propane infrastructure look like at the port?
So perfect. Propane loves the port, right? And the port loves propane. So a couple things. So a propane tank is not open to the atmosphere. We work underneath relatively low pressures. If it's 60 degrees outside, we have 100 psi in the tank. So you kind of compare that. CNG is 3,500 psi in the tank, and hydrogen we're over 10,000 psi. So you look at the affordability there, because higher pressure vessels, they cost more. Simple steel tanks is all that propane is made of, or the propane containers are made of, and so they're affordable. You look at comparing propane infrastructure to CNG infrastructure. CNG is 3 to 4x, hydrogen's 5, 6x, and then you even look at batteries as we bring it in. We start setting transformers. It's always concerning. Another thing that really happens in the ports are contamination. So bunkering fuel, if there's fuel spills, if there's leakage, propane won't contaminate the water, won't contaminate the soil, and we're not a greenhouse gas. We're not made of methane. So even if there is a propane leak, it goes to atmosphere, right? As long as we stay without 25 foot away where it could combust, that leak will go back and doesn't pollute the environment anyway at all. Other thing that it brings to it is, since it's sealed, there's no oxygen in our tanks. So as long as they keep the paint on the outside, there's tanks that I've worked on in Florida that are from the 1940s. So as long as that propane tank is being used, on the inside, the oil, the lubricity of the propane, it really pickles the insides of these tanks. So as long as they're within use, we don't degrade. And so, all of those pieces add up, and then we go to deployability. We know how long it takes to build some of these new plants or bring in electric infrastructure. I know people still waiting to get their electric infrastructure where we've set propane generators to charge their fleet, which is good, right? We're charging them cleaner than the electric grid in 48 states, but it's on-site power generation. But propane can do that. Like, hey, our stickers, energy for everyone, right? I'm wearing it on my chest. So I would say that it's one of the fastest deployable infrastructures that are available. The ports, if they need mobile fueling, they use one of the bobtail delivery trucks in there. They train the guys, they come up and they can fill anywhere in the port. Other ports need fixed fueling, but you can bring a tank and you can build a plant. Back in my plant building days, you would show up on a Monday, and 14 days later, there's a full propane plant. Low voltage to run the pumps, easy installation, some concrete work, some crash protection, you're up and running. And so that's really the scalability and the affordability that besides the product, it's really easy to install. And then I would say 90% of the ports are already using propane forklifts. So most of them have some infrastructure that may need to just be increased in size of storage, but they continue on.
You brought up the electrification, and if you want to look at it that way, another alternative fuel, if you will, is electric. And I'm sure I know many ports are exploring electrification for their port equipment needs. So when you look at electric, and I know you're always very even-handed to not badger another fuel or another energy source, but how does propane compare from an infrastructure and an operational standpoint when you look at it compared to electric?
So, I mean, I love electric equipment. I mean, if you get in there and you drive it, my wife drives an electric car, so I love to tell that story. She's a school teacher. She drives 25 miles to work. She drives 20 miles home. She plugs in every day. She probably only has to plug in once a week. And I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. We have some of the cheapest electricity there, most affordable, I should say. I won't even say that. So it really makes sense. But when it gets cold, they use more electricity. Or if we go to places where electricity, the kW starts costing more, or if we're doing big movements like we are in these ports, right? We're moving TEUs all over the place where there's a lot of battery life. Now the batteries are getting there. People said they couldn't be through 8 hour shifts. I know of some tractors out there that they're getting through 16-hour shifts easily, which still gives them time to charge. All right, so this is real deal, and some of those locations they are using propane generators as they're still waiting to get their electric, and that makes sense too. And even being able to have their own fuel on site, they control their own destiny. So I think propane is going to play a part as we electrify more equipment at the job site, at ports, just even in common everyday life. It's going to make sense. But our infrastructure, you brought it up, it's a good thing. It's the copper, the aluminum that's going to take to bring new feeders in. It's the transformers. It's going to take time, but electrification is coming here. And as we talked earlier, 2030 is 4 years away. Well, 3.5, right? We're moving along. We're almost halfway through March here. So, and I hate to keep throwing that at people, but there's goals that we need to be able to make. And so, seeing our charging times, seeing how long it takes to do the installation, waiting for technology to catch up, battery life, it's coming. But for right now, propane can either help that electric equipment or can help the decarbonization beforehand. And we'll see where everything goes with the cost of installing these infrastructures. But I know you brought up data centers twice, where there's a lot of push that data centers are going to have to generate their own electricity because our grid can't handle it right now. And we're looking at projects with them too, right? Because propane can provide that prime power, same as natural gas does also.
Jim, let's get down to some specifics. When you look at at a port, obviously there's a lot of equipment running around. So what types of equipment and ports are currently available running on propane?
So we're going to start off first because when you go around, you always see a propane forklift. And the reason why the ports are using those propane forklifts is because you can drive them inside the buildings, right? A lot of our stuff is outside, but we still have inside storage, cold storage, especially when you're dealing with like steel rolls or anything that has to be on the environment. We always see propane forklifts, so that's why the ports already understand it. Big change where we're starting to really push. We have 3 manufacturers at market right now, working on a 4th for propane yard spotters or terminal tractors, if you want to call them. Really makes sense for people to transition. We're seeing requests for price all over the United States right now, and I really hope it's from some of our podcasts. Right, people are hearing their understanding. We have the stories, and it's not new technology. You can order a new yard spotter, and it's going to be delivered, in a couple months, not years. So it really gets us where we're going. But then you also got to, look at the other equipment around the ports. Our medium and light duty trucks. You can get those all to run on propane. You can start to, people movers, so cutaway vans, buses, those can all do that. So when we start looking at the cruise ports, we can help them decarbonize. And then, it's all the other ground support equipment around there that is available. So I actually made a one-pager that I gave to all of my propane marketers. And I said, here, give this to your driver. And it has a picture of all the equipment, 7 different pieces of equipment. I'm like, have your driver just circle what's in the ports, and we can go back and we tell the ports, hey, here's where you can decarbonize, here's where we can meet your goals of decarbonization, and you can save a couple dollars. And we're growing our existing customers, and the OEMs, they're jumping on board because, as I've told you in the past, I represent 2,900 different propane marketers out there, or retailers. So it's a big industry who's already delivering to these customers. So I always tell the ports, reach out to your propane supplier, partner with them, because as you increase the gallons, because your propane is going to become more affordable. You start bringing on-site fueling instead of bottle exchange. So it's very flexible to help them meet those goals.
You know, um, we're obviously across all of our sectors because we're looking at maritime, I'm looking at offshore energy, I'm looking at subsea, I'm looking at ports and logistics, and alternative fuels, future fuels, however you want to call it. That's obviously very topical. Also, a big focus on renewable fuels. Is propane in that renewable fuel discussion?
Yeah, so as we talked about the refinery process, propane's one of the first gases that come off. It boils at minus 44 degrees. It's easily liquefied. That's where we get our energy density. So a lot of the renewable propane that's being delivered today, and we're working our way up, right? 6 years ago it was a science experiment, and it was also PERC's job to get out there and talk to refineries, saying, hey, this gas that comes off when you're refining other fuels, they usually bring that back in for the heat. We told them, hey, since you're using, use cooking oil. That's where most of our sustainable aviation fuel is coming from. Um, Propane's coming off of it. So by them going, we'll go down carbon intensity a little bit here, but by them using conventional propane or conventional natural gas in their refinery process, it really doesn't affect their carbon intensity score too high. So we have conventional propane, which has a carb or EPA carbon intensity. So this is whole life cycle from how do we process it, how do we move it, where do we use it, has a carbon intensity of 79. Now I really give my industry a hard time because we drive a lot of diesel trucks. So part of that carbon intensity as we go through, our diesel delivery trucks moves our carbon intensity up. If we drove propane, we would actually have a carbon intensity of in the 60s instead of 79 because they're saying, EPA says we go 200 miles every gallon. So just so we're looking apples to apples. So carbon intensity of conventional propane is 79 grams per megajoule, so it's carbon equivalent. The national electric grid, carbon intensity is 131. So right now, conventional propane being used in the truck, total life cycle emissions, is cleaner than the electric grid in 48 states. Now, where there's more, you get the Pacific Northwest, they have a lot of hydro and they have a lot of really clean energy. Or you start to go to some of the states where there's a lot of nuclear power, it's a little bit cleaner. But Ohio, since you were in your Ohio State and where I'm from, you know where a lot of our electricity comes from? It comes from coal, right? Now, coal's cleaner than it used to be, but you go down to the Ohio River there's more coal moving than ever because we need more electricity. We are energy consumers. So we get that placed. Now when we talk about that renewable propane that's being produced right now, most of that's going to California, right? That's where the really push is. When it leaves the refinery, it has carbon intensity 7. After it goes across the rail and gets delivered in the truck, right now EPA approved, CARB approved, it has a carbon intensity of 20.8. So that's really getting low, right? So that's ultra low carbon emissions life cycle of the equipment. You start looking at a piece of electric equipment, depends which grid it's connected to, right? Because the clean Ohio equipment isn't that much. We can go to West Virginia or anywhere in this area where I'm at. It's not as clean as everybody thinks it is. So, as we go down this path of renewable propane, as fleets switch over, and we'll use the yard spotters example, they're switching it, they're cleaning the electric grid. But as renewables come in, it's the same molecule. So you don't have to change your infrastructure. You don't have to change equipment. You don't have to change seals. You can blend it in from 1% to 100%. So now you have a clear path to your 2050 goals of net zero carbon emissions. Now you see a lot of the grants coming forward and the way people are looking at it because it was zero emissions. And that's where electric equipment really comes into play because there's nothing to measure.
Hmm.
But when we start looking at hydrogen, we start looking at propane, we look at natural gas, we have a tailpipe. And so we do have tailpipe emissions. And that's why you got to look at total impact. And renewable propane's there. And by 2030, we're projecting, with the refineries coming online and the feedstocks are coming up, to have 1 billion gallons available. You start looking at some of the pathways So there's renewable pathways where they're breaking down solid waste and recyclable plastics and old tires, where you start having negative carbon intensities. We invested with some groups that were breaking down methane to make renewable propane. So those start seeing negative carbon intensities. So as it blends in with conventional propane, there is a true path to net zero carbon emissions for fleets today to switch to propane. And so it's exciting. And since it's a byproduct, it's not as expensive as some of the other alternative or biogases that are out there. And we have infrastructure. There's not a city or a state across the United States that doesn't have access to propane and propane storage. Because like I told you, I represent 2,900 propane marketers.
Absolutely amazing. It is exciting. I swear. Like I said, I've been doing this for over 3 decades, and I've never seen the rapidity with which change is coming now. And I especially appreciate you calling out my Buckeye badge of honor, Jim. As always, appreciate your time. I really just had one more question. So, I was going to say if a port director or terminal operator was listening today, but I'm going to make sure that they are as we draw much closer to our ports of the future in Houston at the end of March. But for those port directors and terminal operators listening today, what would you want them to understand about propane?
So I just want them, if you're thinking about it as a fleet manager, and the ports are easier to talk to because they all understand propane. They've had propane equipment. So it's really easy to adopt. There's equipment available today, as I listed, and any of those port manufacturers can go to propane.com. They can find me, they can link to me. I will connect them with manufacturers of propane powered equipment. I will connect them with people who can deliver them propane. So that's super easy. You kind of look at your capex. We can start tying fuel infrastructure for the vehicles that they buy, so they pay for it by the gallon, not straight out where we got to come up with $200,000. Now, when you look at fueling infrastructure, $200,000 isn't a big number for a port when we compare to the other fuels that we talked about. So it's really affordable for them to do. It's something that can be deployed quickly, right? So we can go to do that. And then right now, what's happening is the stability. The stability of the price of our fuel is not taking the big spikes that's happening right now. Again, you can look over the past 25 years, propane has always stayed below. It's very level. We don't get the spikes now. It will rise and it will fall, but they can lock in their pricing right now. And locking in your fuel pricing for 3, 4, 5 years is huge. And then the last thing is you're going to clean up your emissions. When I talked about particulate matter, I talk about NOx emissions. There's almost zero particulate matter that comes out the tailpipe of a propane powered piece of equipment. That's why we can drive it inside the building. You kind of start looking at your NOx emissions. That's the next thing. So when you get rid of the particulate matter and the NOx, when you're cutting by 99%, we did a study at PNCT where we show that it's really making a cleaner environment for the employees and the surrounding communities. So you're making a bigger difference, and you're locking in your fuel price, so it's affordable. And our grants are finally being written, and I'm seeing in grants they're actually calling out propane finally. We've been working. PERC has been working on that for years, and we are a clean fuel. Congress even looks at us as a clean fuel, and now we're starting to be recognized, and it's finally saying propane, or maybe LPG, but they're still looking for propane powered equipment, and now's the time to make the difference. And it's the thing. It'll get us to where we need to go.
Thank you for listening to Maritime Matters. If you would like to be featured on a future Maritime Matters podcast, visit www.marinelink.com or email maritimematters@marinelink.com.